We were going to go to Joe Biden just then. What's your reaction to these announcements from the president-elect?
Well, I think it's hugely significant, both in terms of the personnel who he's actually chosen for these positions, but also in terms of what they represent from a policy perspective. If you look at, the fact that he's chosen an immigrant to kind of lead up Homeland Security, that's a huge symbolic shift, really, from the Trump era, which really showed zero sympathy, kind of in that role towards, people coming towards the United States, particularly from Central and Southern America. So I think, just in terms of kind of national security and immigration, it's hugely significant. Yes. But on the international stage, I think if you look at the picks as well, having, John Kerry, as a kind of climate envoy is very, very significant because, the fact that, they even have that position of a climate envoy. Obviously, under President Trump, the US withdrew from the from the Paris Climate Accord, which John Kerry played a significant role in actually negotiating. So I think it really represents, a return to kind of the US leadership role that it previously had. But also, if you look at the fact that, so many of the people that Biden has picked, many of them were actually involved in the Obama administration, and served for quite a long time. So I think it really shows continuity and a kind of return to the pre-Trump status quo. And my other point would just be the fact that obviously under President Trump, we've seen a huge turnover in terms of the number of staff in these key positions. I would very much expect actually Biden's picks to be in their roles significantly longer.
So this is a very confident move, you'd say. In fact, he said America is back ready to lead the world. It's a very confident statement. And also very interesting how, as you say, broad representation, men, women, from different ethnic backgrounds and so on. This is a bold move.
I think that's correct. And, if you really look at the coalition that actually brought Biden to power, really from the kind of center all the way to the far left, I think, Biden made clear throughout his whole presidential campaign that actually his administration was going to be, filled with people that represented, the full kind of political spectrum, but also represented very much America in terms of its background and ethnicity. So I think, it is a very confident pick for Biden. But I think also, the fact that he hasn't just picked kind of career politicians, which, often is the case for these key roles. Biden has picked a lot of professionals for the role. And I think actually that means that he might have a significantly easier time getting them through the Senate. We still don't know, whether the Senate will be Republican controlled or Democratic controlled, because there's still a couple of elections for the Senate going on in Georgia. Yes. But I think ultimately, these picks will likely pass through the Senate, but we'll have to see.
Georgia elections will be held on the 5th of January. And obviously, there's been a lot of talk about how those will go. Is this why Trump's been refusing to concede? How do you think the Americans will react to this? Will they feel reassured, or will the Republicans use this as a tool to gain more votes in January for those two senatorial positions?
I think these picks don't really give the Republicans much to use in terms of fire for those two elections taking place in Georgia. I think, Biden hasn't really picked particularly controversial people for the roles. There's no one particularly on the far left. And, really the kind of only thing that I would imagine the, Republicans might go for is the fact that the new Secretary of kind of Homeland Security obviously has a very different perspective to the Trump administration in terms of border security and in terms of immigration. So I would actually imagine that would be the key area that Republicans might campaign on. They may use that as a threat and say, well, actually, if you elect these two Democratic congressmen, that you're going to have, increasing threats of immigration and, all these continued kind of stirring up of fear. that's really taken place under the Trump administration of migrants. They may go after the fact that Biden has created this post of a climate envoy, but I would doubt that, considering actually that the majority of people in America, including Republicans, actually support climate action.
We were talking about how Joe Biden's going to be a very different president from Donald Trump. Even between speakers, seeing them wiping down the podium there is a statement in itself, isn't it?
I think that's absolutely correct, and really every level of policy, from pandemic policy to foreign policy, we're going to see a very significant shift. Part of the frustrations, I think, of the Biden camp at the moment are the fact that they have to wait for so long after the election actually to be sworn in. Obviously, we have this period that actually is quite unusual between the election and the actual inauguration. And, normally that's not so significant because often there's a kind of seamless transition between the two administrations, even if the two parties, or even if the two presidents kind of come from different parties. But, until pretty much yesterday, we've seen quite an obstructionist, way of handling the administration. And I think also there's frustration with a complete lack of, seriousness to which the Trump administration has taken the pandemic. Obviously, he's still continues to kind of rule out, increasing social and economic restrictions to get the pandemic under control. And really, the consequence of that is just spiraling COVID infections and, unfortunately, spiraling COVID deaths really across the United States.
So this is a remarkable step forward. And we've just got a matter of weeks now before the Electoral College casts its votes. The states individually, one by one, are slowly over the coming days being certified. Are we confident that what we're seeing now is what is actually going to go forward? Is Joe Biden really going to become the president on the 20th of January next year?
I think it's almost guaranteed, to be honest. I mean, obviously, there is a different narrative coming from, Trump supporting media, which, continues to contest that, this election is kind of ongoing in terms of a dispute and there are ongoing legal issues. But really, there's no kind of chance whatsoever that Trump will be able to, shift the number of electoral college votes in enough states really to actually shift the election. And I think also, if you look really over the last week or so, the Trump administration's strategy has been shifting from legal contentions, which really have failed catastrophically, to trying to kind of exert political pressure over state legislatures, particularly Republican-controlled state legislatures, to try to, ensure that they don't give approval to the final election results. But really, I think that's extremely unlikely. I think it'd be so unprecedented and so obvious that it would be a kind of attempt to overrule the result of the American people. And, if you look at the last major contested presidential election in 2000, 20 years ago, that went on for a number of weeks, the final difference that really cost the election for Democratic candidates, was the fact that it was 500 votes in the state of Florida for Al Gore, and really we're looking at over 6 million votes that Biden has pulled ahead. Even till today, as they continue to count votes, Biden continues to increase his lead. So I think it's all but certain that Biden will be the president on 20th of January.
The president-elect introducing his new team. But behind these, there will be some other major changes back to the status quo ante, we imagine. For example, as you mentioned, John Kerry was very much involved in the original Paris climate agreement. Will the US be returning to that now?
I think it looks like they will be returning to the Paris Climate Accord. It was one of the key kind of foreign policy promises of the Biden campaign, really, stretching all the way back from when he started his campaign. And I think, what we've seen under President Trump has been sort of isolationism, both in terms of trade, but also in terms of kind of global cooperation. And I think actually the US rejoining the Paris climate change will signal, obviously, kind of from a social responsibility perspective, that the US takes its kind of superpower role very strongly. But I think you'll also see a very different role for the US in terms of other organizations. I think you will see the US quite promptly rejoin the World Health Organization, which obviously Trump decided to leave quite astonishingly during the middle of a global pandemic. But you also may see him, having more emphasis on kind of global trade organizations and kind of try to step back from the trade war and the kind of hostile narrative that President Trump had really tried to exert, particularly with countries like China, really from the very, very beginning of Trump's administration. So I think we are about to see a very profound shift. But of course, relationships don't change overnight, and unfortunately, when you have a very hostile administration, it takes time to actually rebuild some of those relationships.
And still with us from London is Adam Schwarz, a political commentator. Adam, history in the making there. The transition has now fully kicked off, we can say. So, from what we've just been witnessing, what's your ongoing comments?
Well, I think two things really struck me from John Kerry and Kamala Harris's comments. The first, the fact that John Kerry kind of invoked the spirit of the Second World War to describe the scale of the challenges that the world faces in terms of how it deals with climate change. John Kerry is part of the kind of post-war generation, and he very much understands, just how, significant the impact of the Second World War was. So I think the fact that he views the challenge that's ahead of him on that level really indicates the priorities of the Biden administration in terms of climate change. The other thing that both John Kerry and Kamala Harris mentioned was the fact that they are going to restore faith in facts and science. And of course, ultimately belief in climate change, requires belief in both of those things. But I think that also is just an indication that we're moving away from the kind of post-Trump, narrative of, trying to say, well, facts don't matter, and really saying that anything goes in terms of, not having to worry about evidence to kind of back up your claims or anything like that. So I think both of those were very significant in terms of policy and narrative. But just on John Kerry, I think he's a brilliant pick, because I think, the fact that he was Secretary of State under Barack Obama before Trump means that he has an excellent global reputation, but also the fact that he has extremely good relations really with diplomats and world leaders around the world. And often when you have a new person in post who hasn't been in that role before, there's actually a huge amount of work that goes into the kind of diplomacy of just trying to introduce those people to the kind of key contacts around the world. So I think the fact that, John Kerry already has a good relationship and a good reputation globally, I think places the Biden administration in an extremely good position for advancing its foreign policy objectives.
And very interesting optics in that in that press conference, in the way it was staged. When we've been looking at Donald Trump's, it's been individuals speaking, but almost at the feet of Trump. And yet today this was much more an equal team sort of feeling. Would you agree with that?
That's absolutely correct. I think it was quite visually striking, really, that they came across as a kind of collective together, not only socially distanced, but just in terms of the positioning. And I think that really represents the kind of difference in style between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Donald Trump really, from the beginning of his presidential campaign, from when he kicked it off in 2015, has kind of launched himself into the political arena as a personality cult. And I think it's very much viewed as him being the center of absolutely everything. And I think, as I mentioned before, Biden really was elected because of a coalition from the kind of center all the way to the kind of far left of the kind of political spectrum in America. So I think, the fact that, he has a very strong team that not only kind of visually represents America, but also from a kind of policy perspective, I think, very much, signifies the difference in style. And this won't just be, one person sort of dictating in a kind of almost autocrat kind of style that we saw under the Trump administration.
So Joe Biden, would you say, has got off to a good start?
I think he's got off to an extremely good start, considering the huge disadvantages that he's faced, in the first couple of weeks after the win. Normally, when there's a kind of clear lead like this, whoever is the, losing party concedes quite quickly. If you look at the last time this happened in 1992, when George Bush Sr. lost to Bill Clinton, he immediately gave a very gracious speech in which he, said that Bill Clinton had won. And what that really did was unlock a huge amount of resources for Bill Clinton to be able to, begin his transition. And actually, the last few days before Trump had kind of unlocked some of those resources for Biden, the Biden administration was looking to crowdfund its resources for trying to support this transition. So I think, considering the very limited resources they've had, I think they've done actually extremely well.
Well, that's, together we've been watching the first stages of the transition live tonight. Thank you so much for your patience staying with me, but it's been very interesting to have your feedback on your immediate reaction to that. So thank you so much for joining us today, Adam Schwarz.